Kathy, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, well, I'm Kathy Haigh. I've been a state representative now in the 35th for 14 years, which is hard to believe, but time flies. I am a veterinarian is still in practice in Shelton with my husband, and now my son has joined us working full-time in the clinic, which is actually giving me more time and incentive to do this legislative job. I am a past member and president of our local school board. I had 12 years on the board there before I got involved with the legislature, and it was a very big reason for me actually getting into the legislature. I didn't plan on doing it before that. I was born and raised on a farm in northern Ohio. I was a big 4-H person. I went to school at Ohio State, graduated there in 1976.
It's a good year.
It was a good year. And we moved to the Shelton area, my husband and I, looking for a place where we were really needed and wanted, and also anywhere but Ohio and Indiana. And we came through that area of Mason County and found out that the veterinarian there really didn't want to do large animal work anymore. And so it seemed like a real opportunity for us to move into that area, and we've been there now for 34 years in practice. I've been very active in my association. I'm a past president of our local veterinary association, as well as the first president of the Washington State Veterinary Medical Association back in the mid-90s. I love the work that I do. My focus is on education funding. I am have worked very hard to improve the quality of our education. I look for accountability and training for teachers. I've been a real pressure for full-day kindergarten, funding for full-day kindergarten. But in that process, I've also begun to learn how important early childhood education is, the first 5 years, and that'll remain my focus.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Dan Griffey. I'm a professional firefighter by trade, a lifelong resident of the 35th District. I grew up in rural Mason County. I have 3 children and live in the town of Allen. I'm running for this position because I'm concerned about where we're headed in Washington State, especially in the rural communities. It seems like every rural job, value, and tradition is continuously under attack by King County, and we need a representative that represents the rural jobs, values, and traditions instead of King County's. They have way more representation than they need. In the rural communities, we make and have made some of the best mechanics in the world in all vocations, be it auto mechanic, HVAC, welders, woodworkers. When I went to school, we had all kinds of vocational training in the schools. And I think it's a tragedy that we have to just send a very small percentage of our children to vocational skills centers to get vocational training. We need to bring back vocational training to our schools. We need to cast off the idea that working forests are bad. With the spotted owl legislation, we saw my rural community go from a place that had all kinds of rural jobs to one that has been functionally unemployed at an alarming rate. Some years it's as high as 20%. One can argue because functionally we don't count the functional unemployment rate. One could argue we're still around 20% functionally unemployed in rural Mason County. We can't allow this to happen any longer. We know that our working forests are good for the environment. We know that the spotted owl demise of the spotted owl wasn't because of the logging, it was because of the barred owl. I look forward to serving you as your representative. Thank you.
Okay. The two of you were here 2 years ago. We've done this once before. And so I thought the first question I'd like to hear is, Dan, what have you done in 2 years? What have you researched? What have you learned? What's different about you as a candidate now? And then Kathy, I'll give you the opportunity to just say how you've evolved as a legislator. What have you done in the 2 years? And give us kind of some specifics on why people would look at this race differently than they did the last time you ran against each other. I'll start with Dan.
Well, what I did specifically is fully immerse myself in politics. I went to Olympia. I watched the bills from inception, so from idea or conception all the way through passage. I want to serve as in my freshman year and not have a big learning curve like most freshmen do. So I spent a lot of time in Olympia. The other thing I did is I just started going to every group activity that I could find. I went to any community groups to understand what they needed. When you talk to, I joined every chamber of commerce in the most every chamber of commerce in the 35th district, because I want to know what business needs in the rural communities. The best way we can help our rural communities is put them back to work, and we need to know what the businesses need. So I had to go out and find out what they needed. And then I started doorbelling like crazy. We had a doorbelling effort that started in January in the snow, and it was quite fun. The power was out and the people were actually excited to see somebody, so it was a good effort. But I think as a state representative, you have to know what the people need and what they want and what their representative can do for them. And so I fully immersed myself in that process.
Well, we have been through 2 to 3 years of dramatic change in state government. We've had to cut budgets over and over and over again. That meant going back into special sessions, and actually before we went into those special sessions, we had done a lot of work on the budget to make sure that the bottom line was still black in this state. But in that process, especially in this last year, although the economy started to get a little bit better and some of the pressure was off to cut things like education funding, there were several proposals that I had to work very hard and build coalitions to not have funding cut, and that would be number one for levy equalization. You saw the governor say cut levy equalization, you saw leaders in the House and the Senate say cut levy equalization, but if you go out to your local school districts and ask them what they would do when they lost millions of dollars in levy equalization because it's not considered basic, it would have been devastating, especially to Central Kitsap School District. There were some little things that I worked pretty hard for. There are many small schools in our area, and they had proposed cut funding for the number of teachers in small high schools. You pay a little stipend for that. And Merriam Knight School District and Oakville School Districts both would have been hurt terribly by that. It looked like a little thing, but again, knowing what our school districts are going through and the difference between the 16 school districts and the 35th district, I fought hard for and made sure that funding cut did not happen. Especially early childhood education, I'm working very hard to get our communities really organized, get the businesses to understand that the investment that we make in early childhood, if we can have good ECAP programs, if we can have support for parents to learn how to be good first teachers for their kids, the amount of money that we invest in those first 5 years can make the most difference. And so making that investment, I protected those dollars over the last 2 years, and now we are working on a county-wide basis to really raise awareness of the business community. I'm very involved in our Rotary organization. We sponsor Oyster Fest, but also trying to get that very business-oriented group to not only just say, yeah, it's a great idea to support early childhood, but to become actively involved in the process. We have a seminar we're going to be putting on the weekend before session starts on the 12th of January, and really to educate people about early childhood, help educate parents, and improve the quality of our early childhood programs. And those are 3 areas I've worked pretty hard in.
Can you be a little more specific when you say we're trying to get businesses to understand the importance? So obviously that's part of it's just educating. I think it's a good thing for our area. But are you also trying to say businesses need to support taxes that will pay for early childhood education? What is the support that they are getting?
They need to become more involved. Number one, aware of the programs that are out there, provide mentorship, to provide actually some physical time and effort. You know, our Rotary does a lot to give awards and scholarships to kids that are graduating from high school. We have achievement awards. We do science fair at the middle school level. But we really don't do very much with the early childhood programs. And if we would get more involved, those programs, I believe that a community is what makes families strong and makes our public education system strong. And it's hard to even know where the early childhood programs are, but they're out there. And I think raising awareness will help people to become involved. And in the end, it may mean taxes, but again, it's the smallest amount of money for the most benefit. So
now,
physically getting involved.
Okay, now, and I understand that there's a certain amount of just having people volunteer or support or whatever else, but if you do want to expand early education, or all-day kindergarten, I think is what you're talking about.
Full-day kindergarten.
If you want to expand that through the state, there's got to be a way to pay for it. And
Right.
so you mentioned education funding proposals. Is that something you're going to bring up and pursue this year? Is there a way, are you prioritizing it above something else? How do you do that?
Right. As we move into this next phase of doing what the McClary decision said, which is the court decision that said we are not fully funding education, they actually called out the issue of full-day kindergarten and going from 445 hours a year up to 1,000 hours a year, which is what they get in the other elementary grades. The issue is not just how much money, but the stability of the dollars. And I believe that we are probably going to have to buy out local levies, which are property taxes that people vote on every 2, 3, and 4 years. And the problem is schools can only depend on it so much because they never know if it's going to be there. And I believe the state needs to buy out those local levies, pay for that, and then the money comes out of not just property taxes, but it also comes out of sales taxes and comes out of B&O taxes, and it takes the pressure off of local property taxes. So that shift, I think, needs to happen.
Is an income tax something you're willing to talk about? Do this? That was the idea that came up last year, that would go straight to education?
Well, if we are going to put in any new tax to pay for education, it's got to be heir apparent. Every dollar that people put into that new tax, they've got to be able to see that it goes to education. I signed second on a bill with a Republican, Bruce Stanmeyer, that said fund education first. Well, it can't just be first. People need to be able to know that the money didn't go into the general fund and get distributed a whole bunch of other places. They've got to know, just like they do with their local levy dollars, that it's going directly to the school, and they need to know what it's doing. So if the state was going to come up with any other ideas, number one, I don't think an income tax is going to fly in this state. I think we're going to have to be a little bit more creative than that, but that would have to come from the people. I'm not willing to put it out there until the people are really demanding it. But if that, and whatever funding source we come up with, and it's going to be billions of dollars by the time we get to 2018, people need to know that this dollar is going directly to school. It needs to be a separate budget, and that's why I support an education funding budget that's like the transportation budget or the capital budget, that we know exactly where those dollars are coming from and where they're going.
Let's let Dan take this one on, because I think this is one thing that you guys agree on. And on your website, it says you want to fund education first. So tell me, give me your opinion on the priority of that early education effort, because you also mentioned vocational and some other things that are important to you. Where do you rank those things as far as which ones need to get the focus? Where's the money coming from for that stuff when you look at the budget, how to stay with?
Well, two things. First of all, I fully support early childhood education and early learning as a voluntary method. I think there are a lot of parents out there with the time to do the instruction in home, and if the state had resources available online to help those parents succeed, that's one thing. And I'm glad our early childhood education right now model is voluntary. The other thing is I fully supported the Fund Education First package, which means we write a standalone budget that prioritizes education as the priority in Washington State. And I'm glad Representative Haigh co-sponsored that with Representative Bruce Stanmeyer, but it got bogged down in a quagmire and didn't make it out of her committee. That is disappointing. It should have made it out of committee. It was a great piece of legislation that would have truly prioritized education in the state of Washington. The McClary decision talked about several things. It talked about stability in funding, but stability in regulations as well. So if you're going to regulate and make a school do something as a state entity, you're going to have to pay for it. It also talked about over-reliance on local levies to fund basic education. We've got to make that true distinction, that true choice. In Washington State, our economic recovery is too fragile right now. Private capital has been scared away from the state of Washington due to our regulatory climate imposed on our businesses and due to our tax climate imposed on our businesses. So if we talk about new taxes right now, we're going to talk about slowing this economic recovery and further delaying the reforms and the needs that our citizens have, which are jobs and, again, low regulatory and tax climate. To fix education, we have to fix the work. I mean, they're part and parcel. People have to go to work. Kids do better when they come from a household that doesn't worry about their parents aren't worrying about where they're going to get their next meal, how they're going to make their house payment. So it's part and parcel. We have got to fix both of them at the same time. And if we're not talking about regulatory burden relief on our businesses, tax relief on our businesses, truly setting aside education funding as a priority and a first thing we fund as our Constitution dictates, we're not doing our jobs as representatives.
Let's get to that regulatory in just a moment. Real quick, are you in favor of tax reform at all? Kind of the question I asked of Kathy. If there's a way to reform taxes so something's dedicated to education, whether it's an income tax, whether it's just assigning some other sort of new type of funding, is that something you're willing to pursue?
So the Fund Education First bill that we talked about, if you read the bill, it talked about setting aside education funding out of current revenue in the state of Washington. So no new revenue at this point in time. I think our economic recovery is far too fragile to be talking about new taxes. The best way to put more money into the state of Washington's coffers is to put people back to work. If we got back to work, if we got unemployment to the rate that it was just before the collapse, that's about $1.5 billion back into the state's overall pool. With that type of money, that's starting to talk about that's about the range that we're talking about we need to infuse into education now. I know it's going to be a little bit more, but the best tax increase right now, or revenue generator for the state of Washington, is to have more people sharing in what needs to happen in the state of Washington in the services.
I'm going to ask both of you real quick your opinion briefly on charter schools.
First.
Let the motorcycle go by first. Yeah, just your opinion on the charter schools.
So the charter school bill,
well, it's a vote. Of course, it's a vote of the people, but I just want to know where you stand personally.
So I actually personally, two things. I don't support the current initiative. I think there's too much regulatory burden in it. I think that, but I do support, however, a charter school experiment. I think that in all things government, we overregulate. We are too burdensome, and I would like to see a couple of schools. Maybe we just take a couple of our public schools, and we reduce the regulations and reporting requirements down to a bare minimums, and encourage local control. That's what I really support. So, be it charter school that we complete that experiment with, or a deregulated, or a very minimally regulated public school, we need to try it. When I talk to the superintendents in our districts, they're talking about several full-time staff members just to comply with national and state regulations. It is ridiculous that it seems like government just has turned into something that likes to write rules and not reduce rules. So that's my stance on.
I do not support charter schools, although over the years we've dealt with the issue many times, and I did vote for it to go to a vote of the people in the early 2001, 2002. I voted for that. And believe that a public-private charter school system could work, but I felt very strongly that it must stay under in some way under control, under the oversight of a locally elected school board. And I think that's the reason Dan probably doesn't support the initiative the way it is. I do believe strongly in local control. So no, I do not support charter schools. Now, in the last 10 years, I have been able to do a lot of research on it. There's a lot of information out there. In the long run, charter schools don't really do any better or any worse. There are total failures and there are great successes with charter schools. It almost always boils down to how much money you're actually paying, just like if you have a private school. And some of the most successful charter schools actually have $18,000 to $20,000 per student that they're paying for rather than 10 or 12. So we have worked very hard to create many options in the state. We have Delta High School, we have Aviation High School, we have the National Guard's option up on the hill here. I always forget the National Challenge.
Washington Academy.
What is it?
Washington Academy.
Washington Academy. I've visited that. And I've seen where students can get 2 years worth of credits in a 6-month period of time. So what I really think needs to happen is we actually need to break apart some of these massive school systems, because if you really look at charters, they're just looking at urban schools. They're not looking at small schools. And I believe the Seattle School District should be 4 or 5 districts with locally elected boards. Again, I believe in a strong community supporting a centralized school district. That's when kids do the best. That community supports the family as well as the students. People know each other, know what's going on. If they want to talk to their school board member, they see them in the grocery store and call them up and talk to them. So part of the success of charter schools is that they're small. And so finding those smaller community schools is, I think, helpful.
Okay. Before we move on, I was wondering if you'd respond real quickly. Dan's, he described it as a quagmire that wouldn't let your bill get out of committee. Could you tell us what happened? What was the problem? Why didn't this move ahead? Will it come up again?
It didn't come to my committee. Went to Ways and Means.
Well,
I can't tell you. I would do everything I could to move that bill forward, but there is, I'm not the majority. I mean, I really am a minority on that issue in my caucus, although Larry Sequist is on board with this too. So I've got to get more people that would be willing to vote for it. We don't put bills out on the floor if you don't have the votes to pass it. So there aren't the votes to pass it until I find those votes.
There aren't the votes in the Democratic caucus to move that ahead.
Right.
Okay. Is this something, if you're elected, you try to?
I will keep working. And like I said, talk to Larry Sequist. He's a believer now, and he's a real force too. But I mean, I can't make people just change their mind on that issue, and especially the chair of Ways and Means certainly doesn't want to give up the.
Okay. No, I just wanted to make sure we were clear on what happened. Something else that both of you mentioned this in your campaign literature, and I'm curious where, just the specifics of your ideas to see how close you are to one another is, you've said, you as a business owner, and then Dan just kind of in general, has said there's too much regulation, and that's something that's slowing down private enterprise in this state right now. What specifically do you mean? Give me some examples of what could be done legislatively and which ones you attack the first.
So very often, there is a big problem and somebody passes a bill and it would solve that big problem, but small businesses especially get scooped up into that, and we don't have the people to do it. So specifically for me, and I actually passed the bill that would get the veterinarians out of the business of having to report every classified drug that they are dispensing to dogs, and that would be sedatives and those kind of things. Some of the stronger pain medications, which we don't use all that often and are not abused in the animals, and we don't give out the amounts, because dogs are usually 10, 20, 30 pounds, not 200 pounds. And yet they swooped us up in this reporting of drugs, and we were going to have to hire somebody, at least part-time, to actually do the reporting on a weekly basis. Oh, by the way, we had to do it online, and my business is not set up to do that. We don't have that kind of computerized system. It was going to cost us a computer system and a staff person. So, I mean, good intentions, but why sweep the veterinarian into that? So I was able to sponsor a bill and get it passed that said, no, we don't have to report on a weekly basis. Yes, we will do some reporting probably on a quarterly basis, which would be more reflective of a significant amount of drug that we might use. But it's that kind of thing that happens. So, I mean, that was just last year. And federal laws are just as bad as the state laws. And there's no bill that goes in place because somebody just wants to make a small business miserable. But very often, small business gets swooped up into the reporting process.
How would you propose, I mean, obviously you knew about that one because it was a personal experience you had. But how would you propose, other than when you hear complaints from constituents, evaluating which one of these regulations, saying, wow, this one's way too much, this one, we probably do it. How do you do that?
Well, okay, so we've always got the unfunded mandates bill. Local government, your county commissioners have always brought those bills forward, and we actually go through some of the mandates that local governments have, or some of the mandates that school districts have. And you'd think, well, we could just go through and take those mandates away. They don't have to do the reporting. But then somebody screws up, and there's a court case because of it. And because there's a court case, people decide you've got to do the reporting. One would be fingerprinting, background checks. They can get pretty expensive. And how expensive they were when those were put in place and how expensive they are now has changed dramatically.
In which direction?
To increase, yeah. Although I think technology might actually be able to decrease that to some extent now with the information that they have and the way they can identify people. But that would just be just one of them. Local school districts have a lot of rules. Now it's reporting on, and I did not support this, and I know Dan knows about this, with online education. I really believe that is the kind of option that we can offer to students. If we don't have charter schools, they need options because not all kids are going to flourish in our public education system. Some of the funding got cut over the last 2 years, and I begged them not to do it, but it did anyway, to up between 10 and 20%. And some of those programs are going away because of it. But not only that, some of our alternative high schools got really hurt by that funding cut, and would be one of the first things that I'm going to really try to restore. But the other thing that happened, and a lot of times you write a law, but then the agency that has to write the rule for that law writes a lot more into the rule than you ever meant to be there. So there has to be a process of going back and looking at why was the rule written that way. Well, we thought that was what you meant, is what the agencies will tell you. And the education department is the same way because they err on the side of too much. And so the paperwork now for if you're going to have students that are in your school using online education had to have a weekly reporting, and it doesn't make any sense. But I mean, I'll be working on that, but that really just came to the fore this year. So that's the kind of thing that you need the information, but if you aren't going to pay somebody to collect the information and write it up, then it's pretty hard to get the information back.
Let's bring back to the original, the question that more focused on business.
Business regulations.
You said you've been talking to chambers of commerce, you've been out knocking on doors and you're hearing things. So give me some specifics that you say, boy, this one is really bothering people, this is the one I'd take on.
Well, there's a lot. But one of them in the building and trade industries. We have varying participation in the Master Business License Program in Washington State. And what that means is there are some cities and some local jurisdictions that participate in Master Business License. So if you get a building or a permit and you're a contractor and you do roofing and you do plumbing, you buy one permit and it works in all these other jurisdictions. But there's nowhere near enough participation in that. If we made a Master Business License participation program mandatory from all of the rural jurisdictions, that would help immensely these contractors that go from county to county. You know, they could be living in a 3-county area and working in a 3-county area, but it's only 50 or 60 miles depending on the border. That would help a lot. Also, the collecting of sales tax. Washington State collects tax, if the business provider could write one sales tax form instead of to all those other jurisdictions, it would help them a lot. So instead of having full-time employees in government compliance roles, they could have full-time employees actually doing the job and making the business better. Department of Labor and Industries, especially in the forestry business, has basically priced all loggers for at least the major providers of employers of loggers in Mason County out of existence, because it costs almost double their salary to put a logger on the ground. So what they've done is they've contracted. So they go to individual contracting. Now some, and mainly on the left-hand side of politics, say that the businesses are doing this to get out of paying taxes. They're not getting out of it they're not doing that. They're doing what they have to do to survive. The other things that we do, and I'm an absolute avid fan for, Kathy is absolutely right, what we do is we pile regulations on top of regulations, and when our legislators write laws, the regulators seem to write the regulations to comply with them that absolutely do not match. So I support a sunset and review committee in Washington State. I will be an absolute avid advocate for a sunset and review committee. Texas has a model, I think it's Texas, excuse me, that every law and bill in the state of Texas comes before the sunset and review committee. So when the legislators write a law, they write a metric, a test metric, that talks about how we talk about success and failure. And I think this could be bipartisan, because all too often we hear about business preference laws in Washington State, again, especially when we're talking about revenue generation, more revenue generation, that is unfair and this business should pay more, that kind of thing. And I think if you have a strong sunset review committee that has the ability to, one, if the bill doesn't get reviewed by the committee, it automatically sunsets, and two, if it doesn't pass the test. See, that's the deal. Every time we write a piece of legislation, we have a reason why we wrote it. And if it doesn't pass that test, it needs to go away. And instead of having these piles and piles and piles of rules and regulations in Washington State for our businesses to comply with, we could have a process where we just wash them away periodically and start it over. That's kind of my thoughts on it.
This is not exactly on that line, but it's kind of similar, I think. And this is a bill, and I want to get Dan's opinion, because it's something that you and Fred Finn were both a part of being co-sponsors on, is a bill that says any initiative that's going to impose more costs on the state, basically, has to identify a funding source as well. If we're going to ask people to vote on something that's going to cost us money, we got to say where it's going to come from. I guess I'm going to ask Kathy if that's something you would plan to pursue. It didn't make it this year, but is that something that you'd be interested in?
I've looked in it. I didn't read the entire text of the bill. I guess in general, identifying a funding source would be a prudent and smart thing to do. However, I did hear some things with the bill that would have limited the petitioner's ability to write initiatives. I do not, I support Washington State's Constitution and the right to initiative and referendum, and I do not want to limit the ability of the citizens to do that. So I would have to look at it, but in general, I think it would be a prudent thing to do. I mean, if you have an idea, maybe you should have an idea how to pay for it, but I will stand in the way of limiting the citizens' ability to petition by referendum.
And Kathy, is there something to be done to that bill this year to see that it moves a little farther?
Well, it'll be interesting. I think the initiative process is very near and dear to my heart, and I do believe that is a real strength of Washington State to be able to do that. But it does make the legislature begin to feel like, the public opinion has to at some point be set aside, and that's a very, very painful thing to do. So yes, I will still support that. What's actually going to happen, I don't know. I mean, I haven't got it on my list of bills that I'm going to be at the front yet. But looking at the issue, I think we will also have to look at the issue of the 60% needed in the legislature to vote for increased taxes. And as I've said, if you're going to make it 60% to increase any kind of fee or tax, you should also have to make it 60% if you're going to reduce any kind of fee or tax. There's got to be some semblance of uniformity to the voting process. And if 60% is really what we think is a good number, then everybody should have to work by that number. And I don't really believe that's a good idea. I do believe in 50% plus one. So on the initiative process, if you wanted, the proposal has been, if you're going to make it a little harder, an initiative would have to pass by a 60% if it's going to increase or decrease taxes. But I just believe democracy is 50% plus one, and I can't change that standard depending on whether I'm voting for my school or I'm voting as a legislator.
What do you think? This is 1053 that we're talking about.
Yeah. So our district voted in favor of it at a 70% rate. I would support my district's stance on it. I believe it should be exceptionally hard to raise taxes and fees and exceptionally easy to lower them. My job as a legislator is to be the best possible steward of the citizens' money. It's their money, it is not my play money, and I will support the citizens of the 35th district overwhelmingly, over 2/3% vote, to impose strict limitations on how to raise taxes in the state of Washington. I really believe it's representative, and I will represent the will of the people that put me in that office.
Anyone else have a question? Larry?
I'd like to go back to education.
Please.
I have 2 or 3 questions on that. How do you define early education?
Early education?
How do you define that?
Well, in our state, it is defined by the Early Childhood Education Act, or it's the ECAP programs that are provided, similar to what the state does with Head Start. And it does involve parents,
So
bringing parents in and helping them.
Kindergarten, or is it even earlier than kindergarten?
Oh, it's earlier. 3- and 4-year-olds are addressed by that program. And then we've also really done quite a bit to combine health care and helping to fund with nursing care. If a mother comes into a hospital, has a baby, and doesn't know what she's doing, doesn't have any support when she goes home, if you let her just go home, she's gonna get tired, she's not going to do a good job, and those first few years are so important. So we have actually nurse home visitation is another program, and that really is outside of education. But we know that, and we do it in Mason County. I'm not sure how much is done in Kitsap County, but it makes a huge, huge difference in the success of those students. So early childhood, I really mean from birth to 5, but in the education realm, I really believe preschool and our 3- and 4-year-olds are included in that.
I'm curious how each one of you would vote. If you had to make a decision, and this is what do you call it in law circles? There's a term. It's a, well, look at me. If you had to make a decision between funding dollars for early education versus higher education, if you had to make that choice, how each one of you would vote.
Well, I will fund early education
over
higher education.
Okay.
And like I said, it's so much less money to work with 3- and 4-year-olds than it is to educate somebody in college. Plus, a 3- and 4-year-old can't really go out and get a loan or a scholarship, and so that's why I'm working so hard to get the community involved, because if the community sees it and sees the value of it and supports it, then it's easier to financially support it. If they don't realize what a difference it makes and that those options are there, it's hard to get the funding for it and support it.
Brad?
Well, I believe that, yes, my idea of early childhood education really is more like kindergarten. I think the citizens are kind of concerned about overreaching government and basically sticking in their nose into family where it doesn't belong. Now, there is some of the stuff that Kathy was talking about with healthcare and that is necessary, and we need to work on it. I don't want to sacrifice our current K-12 program for a brand new program because we haven't fixed it yet. Washington State's getting awards for our early childhood education. I think it's sometimes too far reaching. But I don't want to sacrifice one for the other. I want both of them to succeed if we're going to do it. I'm not that kind of person that wants to sacrifice one for the other. Throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thought. So.
Well, my question is, if you have to put more dollars, if you had to make a choice, you put more dollars in early education versus more dollars in higher education.
I think the better investment would be in the K-12, so they're more prepared to go to school. But in Washington State, I mean, there's people that are talking about taking algebra out of schools because we don't need algebra anymore. I mean, the education thought process is one side to the other. I mean, I think harder is better. The better mathematical education we get, we could better provide for the engineers that we need in Washington State. We're having severe shortages of. So I think an early investment as opposed to a late investment would pay off better.
You know, there's two professions that are beginning to understand and really go out there and support, and that's the sheriffs and police in fight crime, invest in kids. They've realized that if you support those kids and get them started right, that they don't end up in our prisons, which costs us a heck of a lot more money by the time they're 16 years of age. And then the doctors really understanding that it isn't good enough just to do a physical on a kid, give them their vaccinations and send them out the door. It's that teachable moment when the parent is involved with their kids. And so the health professions have really stepped up and are engaging in early childhood education, but support for parents. It's not, I mean, we all believe the parent is the first teacher, but we want them to be the best teacher. And we used to say, well, you know, you get to be a parent and nobody really teaches you how to do it, but there's a lot we can learn as young parents especially, because they care about their kids, they want to do the right thing, and it's very teachable moments.
As long as that education is not mandatory. We live in a free society, and we should not preach to the new families. Resources available out in the community is what government's job is.
Yeah, and I don't support mandatory early childhood.
Peter, a question.
Yes, I've heard a lot about jobs here. I've heard nothing yet about the environment and natural resources, which was a major issue with the candidates for the other district position. So, from each one of you, how do you view jobs versus natural resource protection? Do you think that that's best left to local communities, or should the state enforce natural protection through vehicles like the Growth Management Act and other laws? Do you believe in the Growth Management Act?
I personally am not a supporter of the Growth Management Act in its current incarnation. I think the decisions would be better based at the local level. It has done exactly what it was designed not to do and caused urban sprawl. If you take 5-acre parcels and you make a person build on this 5-acre and this 5-acre and this 5-acre and this 5-acre, what it does is it takes the rural community and makes it into urban sprawl. Where if you would have allowed 5-acre developments, or you would allow local growth areas within the rural communities and some more industrial and commercial within those, we could have had land set-asides, that kind of thing, but that decision is best made at the local level, where you negotiate for those changes with 3 commissioners, or depending on the commissioner district, instead of negotiating with the entire legislature and the regulatory bodies and then having the governor of the state of Washington sign it. It's ridiculous. Where I talk about natural resources in the rural community, our local forest product providers do a very good job and are very good stewards of the environment. It used to be when they cut roads in that the roads would slough off and we get off silting, but right now they're getting to be experts at building roads to slope off to where the water flows to the forest floor and is absorbed there, so we don't get the stream runoff. And that when we cut those trees down and we grow new trees in that area, we're providing jobs, we're providing low-cost timber for building houses, we're providing the planters with jobs to go to replant, and a refreshing of the forest. We're doing a very good job in the forest practices of habitat pathways, so ways for little critters to still have protection and survive.
Is that because they're doing this voluntarily, or because the government has set up a regulatory structure that is forcing them?
I think a little of both. I think that our forest products providers have found that being good stewards means that the yield of their property is better. So there is an economic thought process there. We have had a tendency to have a knee-jerk snap reaction when it comes to protection of the environment. Spotted owl, I pointed out, was one that I think was knee-jerk. The studies have proved now it was not logging that caused that is causing the demise of the spotted owl. It's the barred owl. But we have kind of, again, knee-jerk legislation coming up, or proposals that say spotted owl too is a good idea, where we have more land set-asides and we're going to hire hunters to kill the barred owl. We have to step back and make smart decisions when it comes to our forest products providers, especially because of the jobs they provide in the rural communities and the low-cost timber and building materials that is truly renewable that it provides.
So would you have the state continue as is, or step back, and how far back?
I think I would support the state stepping back. I mean, Growth Management Act is just like, again, sunset and review. We need to talk about Growth Management Act started at a couple pages, and now it's volumes and volumes and volumes of regulations that regulators wrote that it absolutely crippled our local communities. Rural development has come to an absolute standstill. I would like to see that decision-making power be placed back in the county commission's hands.
Oh, okay, so, I drove up here kind of the back way. I had an extra hour, and this part of the country is so beautiful. And our water quality is so important to some of our biggest industry, which is the shellfish industry. We've got to have healthy water systems. And I believe that the government has to be involved in that process. There's a lot of research that goes on when the government, and the one that I can think of is the Puget Sound Partnership, and Hood Canal enhancement are two of the earlier things that government has done, and really help the locals to organize and to really think about water quality and air quality. And we do have a sunset review process going on all the time. It's called the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee, JLARC Committee. I'm on that committee. We are reviewing bills and things all the time, and one was the Puget Sound Partnership, and we really gave them a bit of a scathing review last year. It said, you guys have to be more clear about the outcomes that you're working for, and how are you working with your locals. The Growth Management Act, yeah, I think it's gotten blown out of proportion, but I really believe that the boards that came in and listened to all the work that had been done on a local level, instead of just saying, we don't like that, go back and do it again, they should be much more locally involved. I think they should be actively involved with whatever county government or city government is really working on a plan. And I didn't see that. I saw them just kind of sit back and wait for local government to make a lot of mistakes and then tell them, you got to go fix the mistakes. And I think if government is going to, again, ask for outcomes and mandates, then we need to fund the support, and I think it is fund more expertise at the local level. When the Department of Ecology comes out and identifies a problem with water quality or sediment quality, instead of just saying we're going to shut down shellfish because of it, I think that's wrong. I think we need to get more actively involved in how do we solve the problem. And when that happens, and it does happen, some very, very good things can happen.
Do you believe that some power should be handed back to the local authorities in order to promote job creation?
Absolutely. But like I said, expertise, there's a lot of research that's been done, even like he talks about on the spotted owl. The locals, a lot of them are just, they don't have that information coming to them on a regular basis. So identifying people that really can work with local government to help them make the best decisions rather than just tell them when they're going wrong.
But you talk about coordination, but you haven't talked about regulation. Do you believe in decreasing the regulations to give the power back to the local government?
I don't know if I'd say decreasing regulation to get power back. I think it's not just decreasing, it's really helping to have regulations that really do work. For example, having 5-acre lots does eat up rural areas, and I totally agree with Dan on that particular issue. So I think there needs to be better planning, and I don't know if you'd call it deregulation. I think much of the things that have been in place are for good reasons, but they need to change. I think it needs to be a working document, and the changes need to happen. And if local governments aren't able to come up with the answers, they need help from expertise, and the state should help support that.
Well, we're kind of closing in on our time here, so why don't we give you each one last opportunity. Did you have a question, or you just want to keep talking?
Well, actually, it'd be kind of a segue to the same thing in the wrap-up.
Wrap it up.
Yeah, simply stated, could each of you say why we should vote for you instead of the other person? Rather than, I mean, you can say, yeah, I'm a great person. You agree on some things, you disagree on some things. I as one, haven't seen a really clear case on either one of you. You know, why we should vote for you instead of the other person. So make it now, quickly.
And this will be the closing statement. So anything we've missed.
Which one's first?
Trying to wrap those two things into a closing statement.
Yeah. So which one's first?
Do them together. Do them together. One last shot for
Who
each.
goes first?
Oh. I've answered the wrong question. Why don't we go, Kathy, and finish it.
Well, I'm a known entity. You know who I am, and I've been around a while. I work very hard to make the whole system work. I work across the aisle. Like I said, Bruce Dameyer is a Republican. He'll be going to the Senate. He's already called me and said, I sure hope you get back, because I believe there needs to be a lot better coordination between the Senate and the House. I am a voice for the rural community in a caucus that has a lot of urbanites there. And so when issues about how big a chicken's pen should be so they can flap their wings comes up, or some of the ways that agriculture really is challenged by laws that are coming out of the urban area, like tying up a dog, I am there to speak in that caucus and say, guys, I can't support this. Don't take it to the floor, because I'll find a few others. There's no way I would be willing to vote for that. So I do work across the aisle. Almost every bill that I have, you'll find a few Republicans on it, and there are many Republican bills you will find my name on it. It's very, very important to me, as well as the rural areas in eastern Washington. So I work closely with eastern Washington legislators quite a bit. I really enjoy helping the new folks that come in. There's probably 3 or 4 other people in the House that have been there as long as I have. And it isn't just showing them where the bathrooms are. It's, if you've got a good idea, here's how you do it. And within my committee, I work with all the members of my committee, help them to move bills forward. And even after they're out of the House, there's a lot of work that has to be done in the Senate. I really want the whole system to work, and that means working across the aisle and knowing how things get done and supporting those things. So I will continue to do that. I still continue to work very hard in my community, and this is a job that gives you that time in the summer to work the fairs and work hard in Rotary and those kind of things. So I enjoy the work, and I actually have more time to do it now than I did before, because my son is now practicing in our clinic, and so I think these last few years that I might be doing this job, I can put even more time and effort into it.
Well, thanks for having this editorial review board. My name is Dan Griffey. I'm a professional firefighter by trade. When you elect a firefighter to work for you, or have a firefighter work for you, you have a true champion in you, a true team player, and an absolute advocate for the local areas. Because I'm a lifelong resident of the 35th District, I remember what it was and what it is now. And what it is now is regulated out of existence. I will be an absolute champion for drastic regulatory relief as imposed on the rural communities. I believe in the individual's ability to manage themselves. I do not believe in big government's need to regulate everything that the rural community does. I'm an avid supporter of rural jobs, values, and traditions. I will work hard to bring timber back as a king in the area, and to bring other or employers back to the 35th district. It is not my responsibility as a legislator to tell the citizens how to live their lives, and all too often it seems like that's government's purview, and I will not be that type of person. I encourage everyone to watch the Aurora video, the Aurora shooting video. I hate the fact that we had to go through it, but if you listen to the audio of that and you hear what those firefighters did in a short period of time, the amount of stress they went through, the amount of decisions they had to make in rapid succession to make sure that incident was completed, that's the kind of person that a firefighter brings to you, that quick-witted capability of taking care of everything and anything in a short order to take care of what the rural communities need. So yeah, watch that video and you'll understand what firefighters do on a day in, day out basis. My name is Dan Griffey and I appreciate your vote.
Well, thanks, guys.